public urinal, they perceived an ice cream car round which a group of presumably Italians in heated altercation were getting rid of voluble expressions in their vivacious language in a particularly animated way, there being some little difference between the parties.
Puttana Madonna, che ci dia I quattrini, ho ragione, culo rotto. Intendiamoci, mezzo sovrano più, dici ripero, mezzo. Farabutto, mortacci sui, ma ascolta, cinque la testa più.
Mr. Bloom and Stephen entered the cabman's shelter, an unpretentious wooden structure where, prior to then, he had rarely, if ever, been before, the former having previously whispered to the latter a few hints anent the keeper of it said to be the once famous Skin-the-Goat Fitzharris, the Invincible, though he could not vouch for the actual facts, which quite possibly there was not one vestige of truth in. A few moments later saw our two noctambules safely seated in a discreet corner, only to be greeted by stares from the decidedly miscellaneous collection of waifs and strays and other nondescript specimens of the genus Homo already there engaged in eating and drinking, diversified by conversation, for whom they seemingly formed an object of marked curiosity. Now, touching a cup of coffee, Mr. Bloom ventured to plausibly suggest to break the ice. It occurs to me you ought to sample something in the shape of solid food, say a roll of some description. Accordingly, his first act was with characteristic sang-froid to order these commodities quietly. The hoi polloi of Jarvies or stevedores or whatever they were, after a cursory examination, turned their eyes apparently dissatisfied. Away the one red-bearded, bibulous individual, portion of whose hair was grayish, a sailor probably, still stared for some appreciable time before transferring his rapt attention to the floor. Mr. Bloom, availing himself of the right of free speech, he having just a bowing acquaintance with the language in dispute, though, to be sure, rather in a quandary over voglio, remarked to his protégé in an audible tone of voice à propos of the battle royale in the street, which was still raging fast and furious. A beautiful language, I mean, for singing purposes. Why do you not write your poetry in that language?
Bella poetria, it is so melodious and full. Bella donna, voglio.
Stephen, who was trying his dead best to yawn if he could, suffering from lassitude generally, replied, to fill the ear of a cow-elephant. They were haggling over money. Is that so? Mr. Bloom asked. Of course, he subjoined pensively. At the inward reflection of there being more languages to start with than were absolutely necessary, it may be only the southern glamour that surrounds it. The keeper of the shelter in the middle of this tete-a-tete put a boiling swimming cup of a choice concoction labeled coffee on the table and a rather antediluvian specimen of a bun, or so it seemed, after which he beat a retreat to his counter, Mr. Bloom determining to have a good square look at him later on so as not to appear to. For which reason he encouraged Stephen to proceed with his eyes while he did the honors by surreptitiously pushing the cup of what was temporarily supposed to be called coffee gradually nearer him. Sounds are impostures, Stephen said after a pause of some little time, like names. Cicero, Podmore, Napoleon, Mr. Goodbody, Jesus, Mr. Doyle. Shakespeare's were as common as Murphy's. What's in a name? Yes, to be sure, Mr. Bloom unaffectedly concurred. Of course. Our name was changed too, he added, pushing the so-called roll across. The red-bearded sailor who had his weather eye on the newcomers boarded Stephen, whom he had singled out for attention in particular, squarely by asking, "And what might your name be?" Just in the nick of time, Mr. Bloom touched his companion's boot, but Stephen, apparently disregarding the warm pressure from an unexpected quarter, answered, "Daedalus." The sailor stared at him heavily from a pair of drowsy bagged eyes, rather bunged up from excessive use of booze, preferably good old Hollands and water. "You know Simon Daedalus?" he asked at length. "I've heard of him," Stephen said. Mr. Bloom was all at sea for a moment, seeing the others evidently eavesdropping too. "He's Irish," the seaman bold affirmed, staring still in much the same way and nodding. "All Irish." "All too Irish," Stephen rejoined.